Welcome everyone to the Imperfect Athlete Podcast. This is my show about mistakes, how they happen, what they mean, and ultimately how they change behavior to improve your performance. My mistake of the week is very personal. I'm a bit of someone who doesn't look at their own well-being enough, and I had been suffering with pretty bad neck pains for a while. And I was sort of just saying, well, it's going to be fine. I'll be fine. It's just like I'm busy and blah, blah, blah. And at some point it got to the point where my girlfriend said, you need to go to a physio and you need to get this sorted out. And I got to the physio and physio's like, wow, you can barely look from side to side and you can barely move it. And we did some therapy and it still hurts, but it's getting a lot better. And this is definitely a mistake that it's not the first time in my life that I've made this, that I'm not taking care enough of myself. But I'm trying to change it and put my well-being first and make sure that I'm feeling well before trying to do anything and not sort of put my own pain away because I think that it's not important enough. So again, a mistake this week that I definitely learned from, and I'm hopefully going to change my behavior for once because of it. This week, I have a very special guest. He is a former track and field national champion and a very good friend of mine. We met each other through the sport of volleyball. Derek Watkins. Derek, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's going to be great. So, Derek, as you know, we're going to be talking about your mistakes a little bit. So
there's enough of those to go around.
Oh, there you go. So we're gonna have a lot of fun. But first, let's talk a little bit about your career. So, like, how did you get into track and field? Like, what drew you to the sport? What did you enjoy about it?
Well, it's actually a crazy story how I got into track and field, and this is something that I always look back on, and I'm really happy that it sort of happened this way. I was really big into hockey, and everyone in Canada knows that hockey's our big and only thing. I was actually drafted into the OHL at a very low level. I wasn't really going to actually go. But so when I was in grade 12, my hockey coach, who was basically mentoring me and he believed in me, he passed away unexpectedly. And I was the captain of the team, and I didn't really know what to do. So I ended up trying to play for the assistant coach at the time. It was very devastating for our whole team. But for some reason, I couldn't do it emotionally. It was a lot for me to handle, and I couldn't deal with it. And I was probably about 17, 18. Mm-hmm. So that the rest of that season, I wasn't going to play hockey, which is the love of my life. And I was leaving the high school, and in the foyer was all this big fluffy box and a bamboo stick, and people were running and jumping over this bamboo stick. It was the most weirdest thing, but it looked so fun. I was like, oh my gosh, that looks awesome. So I just stayed late after school, and we just started jumping over this bamboo stick. And I fell in love with it, and I found out it's an actual sport. And they were all on the track team. So that's how I got into track, was just literally walking by a bamboo stick that people were jumping over. And then I ended up just being natural at it. Sometimes you just find a weird natural talent. And it was just so exciting that I just grew and grew. And the rest is history, as we'll talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, so did you end up then playing in or competing, I guess, in high school, or go straight to competing in university?
It was it was pretty. So literally from that day on, I was in grade 12, and the track season is at the end of the year, the school year, and so I talked to the phys ed coach, of course, and I said, oh, can I do this for the school? You guys are doing meets, and then. I started doing that, I went to OFSA, which was ridiculous because it was my first year, and I saw what OFSA was. And OFSA, for those people who don't know, is the Ontario High School Championships, which is a pretty big deal for kids that are in high school. It's a big deal. Well, you think it is at the time. You think it is. But so I went to OFSA and I saw how many kids were there and how like important it was to them and how fun it was. So after I got 9th in my first year, which I thought was pretty good. But then I decided I wanted to do this full time, like take it a little bit more seriously, see what I could actually do. And so I joined the Ottawa Lions, which is the team that is in Ottawa here. And that's the biggest track team in, I think, all of Canada, to be honest. And so I started training for the sport and did it over the summer and then won OFSA the year after, so my final year of high school. And then scholarships and things started happening out of nowhere, and all of that started happening just because of that one incident of
a bamboo stick and a fluffy box.
Yeah, and when you land on that bamboo stick, it hurts. It hurts, so you learn learn quickly.
A fluffy box, like they were using that as the mattress.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't a very good mattress. It was like a whole bunch of cushions piled up. It was it was not up to code. So that was in the late 90s. So the code was a little bit different, I think.
That was allowed back then.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. What's so you jump over some bamboo sticks in a foyer and then you decide to go and to try it out. Like what are some of the first sort of mistakes you realized? You liked the sport, you thought this is fun, jumping over things. You clearly had a knack for it because it went very fast. Like you get to the track and then like what was your first experience there?
It was very it's funny though, I think everyone has a different take on how to absorb athletics. So in my perspective, when I was a hockey player, it's a very type of person that I think hockey players tend to know it all, or they're very cocky, and it's kind of a swagger in the sport. When I went to track and field, it's not like that at all. There's no swearing. It's very prim and proper, and the mentality is very different because it's an individual sport versus a team sport. So one of the things when I went to my first practice, I realized that everyone was there not as a team but as an individual, but we were working as a team, and it was a very different thing to get my head around. And I sort of thought, okay, well, I know how to jump already. I'm seemingly doing okay. And so automatically I wasn't able to really absorb coaches' information just at a young age. And that's a thing that you see with young kids every once in a while. They're not necessarily coachable. Yeah. And I found at the very start of my career, I wasn't as coachable as you would think I should be, because I've never done the sport before. Yeah. And in fact, I taught myself. So I taught myself for the first year, and I taught myself incorrectly. And you're supposed to, you either jump from the right side or the left side in high jump. And I thought I should take off on my right leg, but actually I was supposed to be taking off on my left. But I had taught myself to jump off the right leg. So when I actually got a coach and they said, you're doing it wrong, but I already had success doing this, I was like, okay, no, we're not going to change that. It seems to be working. So that was a thing that I've always looked back on my entire career and been like, if I had just maybe listened back then, and done it properly, maybe I could have gotten, that much better. So there's a whole bunch of things that you go through that are very different.
That's the first, you almost took is it fair to say you took the confidence you had built up in hockey and the proficiency into track, where you maybe didn't have the proficiency?
It did,
you kept the confidence?
I guess I guess you could call it confidence, yeah.
Confidence is a nice way of saying it, right? So when did you realize this? Like, obviously now looking back, you're like, oh, I wasn't coachable. Like, when did that change? Like, how did you realize it and change your behavior?
I think it comes with, certain coaches as you go through your career. And I don't even know how many coaches I've had, because I've been to 3 different universities. I first started at Boise State, which is that was my first university. I went there for a year, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Yeah. Then I went to Purdue, and I graduated from Purdue, and then I went to University of Windsor, and I've also been to University of Toronto. I mean, it's crazy how many different coaches you have. And I think it comes down to, and you know this as a coach, is being able to relate to your athletes on another level that they respect and you respect. So I think my first coach didn't really know what they were talking about, or that was my perception, and so I didn't listen. As opposed to my second coach was a world champion. They went to the Olympics. They had all these accolades, and then all of a sudden I was listening. Now it's not just about the accolades, but it was more so. I don't know you're young and you don't really think things through sometimes, but it's just how you relate to your athletes and your coaches. And I think at the time, for some reason, I just didn't gel with that first coach. And that happens. I mean, gosh, how many times does that happen in sports? Like, if you don't get along with your coach, then oh my goodness, that happens, right?
It's really tricky, yeah.
And absolutely. It's also tricky for the coaches because they have to relate to all these different types of personalities, and they,
yeah, it's from a coach's experience, like from my own experience, I know that I can tell when an athlete doesn't really click with me, and it's really tricky because you try and do so much and you try and help them as much, but you can only I can only change as much about myself as possible. Like the core fundamentals are always going to stay the same, and if that doesn't work out, then it's a really, really hard situation. Yeah. So that's really tricky, but that's really interesting to see that, like, looking back, you're like, oh, the first mistake I made was listening to my coaches. Yeah.
And so young. It's amazing how you have a different mentality. As you get older, you realize respect, you realize understanding, you realize these people have been in the sport for your entire life. you know? And it's a crazy time when you're young. So.
Yeah, and then you come in there being 17, 18, you're like, I know better.
It's so weird.
We've all done that. Like, everyone has made that mistake at some point.
It's incredible.
Thinking that you can't learn anything from a certain person. And regretting that later, I know for sure. So you finish off your high school career by winning OFSAA, and you go to your first university, and you stay there for one season, right?
Yeah, so when I won OFSAA, and then I went to National Juniors, and I got silver, and then I competed for Canada for my first time as a junior. So that was 19.
Okay.
So that was my second year in the sport, and I was number 2 in Canada for juniors, which was like really such a fast progress for all of that. And then now this is something that's really interesting. My grades in high school were so bad. I mean, it's funny how there's a lot of, when you're an athlete, and I was a hockey player, so it's kind of odd, but it almost goes with the territory of, like, you're a hockey player, you're a jock or whatever, and you kind of fall into that fulfillment of hockey is everything, and I don't care about grades, but it doesn't make any sense. So my grades were really, really, really bad in high school. And so I wasn't actually able to go to a university in Canada. Okay. So my grades were not going to let me go to a university in Canada. So once I started seeing the opportunities in the States, you have to take your SATs. And because my grades were so bad, I had to get like a pretty high score to be able to go to the university, because it sort of offsets. So I ended up having to take my SATs 3 times to get Div 1 eligible. Wow. And that was crazy because my parents were driving me to different SAT locations, and all I would do is study, trying to learn the SAT, and then go to different locations. So anyway, I had a choice of 5 different schools that were interested. And I decided to go to Boise State, which is in Idaho, for my first year. And I went there because the coach his pedigree was incredible. He had coached multiple world champions, multiple Olympian high jumpers, etc., etc. And this is another thing that goes back to what I had previously said. I went there, and for some reason I didn't click with the coach. He had all my respect, he had everything, but he was an older man, and his coaching style was a little bit different. It was definitely old school, but it's just so weird when you look back on your career and you try and find these little things, and you're like, oh wow, that's why it didn't work there, because I didn't let myself. Again, it was the change. I was still resistant to change. I had gotten the scholarship, I had gotten there, but he was asking me to change a lot, and I was so resistant. So it's maybe the fear of change as well that I was resistant to, and it just didn't work out in Boise State. So I came back and spent a semester here, and just started like reaching out to some schools, and that's when I got discussions with Purdue University, which is an incredible school, Big Ten, massive athletics, incredible academics, and I mean Purdue was a time in my life that seemed like a dream, literally. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure you had some of the best seasons in your life when you were there, right? Maybe besides the 2009 season.
Yeah.
Like before that. So like what is it like going to the university in the States? What are the differences for Canadian athletes going there?
Oh my gosh. So you know all those movies that you see in the States? It's actually like that. And now it's so funny when I try to tell people about that time of my life, because it does seem like a blur, because it was ridiculous, man. The housing, the cars, you're flying out every weekend to California, to New York, and you're flying. You're not busing. You're getting per diem. Everybody knows you. You're in the paper. It's a university town, and it's just so big. The football games, there's hundreds of thousands of people, and everything is just so big in sports down there. It's incredible. Like it really is like those movies. I look at some of those football movies, and I'm like, yeah, that's what it was like.
That's what
it was like. It's just absolutely insane down there. So you get on another level of expectation. You begin to feel like you deserve all of that. Mm-hmm. And now keep in mind, I jump over a bar for an hour.
Yeah,
that's what I was asked to do. So when I look at it, I'm like, it seems ridiculous that people would care about that or anything, or they would fly me out to this place or that. But anyways, you're down there and you kind of feel like you earned that. So I kind of got a big head when I went to Purdue, but it was also because the NCAA recruits from the entire world. So we had our team, it was like being a small fish in a big pond.
Yeah.
And these guys, I mean, my team was literally every single person on my team, from Croatia to like every different country you could imagine, and they're all the top of each of those countries and so everyone on my team was actually better than most of like 90% of the Canadian national champions, right? It was like this shot putter would break our Canadian record, this javelin thrower would break our Canadian record, this 200 runner would break our Canadian record, and they're just all on my team. Yeah. So you're around this incredible greatness, and you just sort of expect it, and then you strive to be part of that, which is what the NCAA, I think, really instills in people.
But that's very interesting, because on one hand you say, you know, this the fact that it's so the quality of all the athletes is so high, it's pushed me to be better. On the other hand, like you say, sort of the glamour of it make me a big head. Like how did that coincide? Because I would think that if you're a small fish in a big pond, you sort of become humble. Right? You're like, oh wow, I'm maybe not as good.
You know, that's...
was. Like, how does that work together?
Well, that's interesting you say that, because I only found that out when I came to Canada. Mm-hmm. So it turns out, I thought I was striving down there with all these amazing athletes and NCAA champions, and it was just crazy. But when I came to Canada is when I really learned about myself and about who I was as a person and an athlete, and that's what actually made me succeed. It is difficult. Some people would thrive in the big as a small fish in a big pond, and I felt like I did actually pretty good, because I wanted to be a part of the group. I wanted to contribute. I wanted to do everything, and I did very well down there. Made NCAA finals in my last year and got 12th, which was, I mean, that's 12th in the NCAA is pretty good. So I think that was good. But again, it was just a crazy situation where you're basically just trying to meet the standards of everyone around you, and you feel like you are, so you do get a big head, because you're like, oh yeah, I'm one of these guys. I'm just as good as them, or what have you. And it was a huge transition when I came to Canada, but we'll definitely get into that transition.
Yeah. So again, obviously I think this is a great story, and it shows like you thrived, but also there were some things you were struggling with. So what is the thing looking back at it, you're like, that was a big mistake I made down there that, you know, maybe just hindered my progress a little bit, or maybe even made me not reach a level that I maybe could have reached, if you look back at that?
I think being in the moment, especially, and this is really important. Ever since you asked me to do this podcast, I've been able to reflect on my career, and I didn't realize how little I understood at the time of how incredible things were. Yeah. So as an athlete, as you're getting better, you're just focused on continually the next day, okay, what am I going to do better? What am I going to do better? How can I get better? What am I going to do? Oh, we have a competition coming up. We have a meet coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, focus on this. Oh, we've got nationals. You never actually are in the moment and really absorbing, like, wow, I got here. Enjoy it. Relax. Enjoy it. And yeah, we have a meet coming up, but realize this is incredible and really enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
And when I look back on all this stuff, I realize I was so caught up in the moment, I didn't really understand what was happening and how crazy and how amazing that stuff was. So if I could give any advice to anybody, and if you're going to the NCAA or you're going to CIS or whatever it is that you end up doing.
I think it's called U Sport nowadays.
Is it called U Sport?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. When did they change that?
A few years ago, but it's okay.
Okay, to U Sport. Take a second and really understand what you're achieving, because I didn't my whole career until Yella asked me to be on a podcast and look at my past, and he said, oh, you were a professional athlete, tell me about your career. And I started going through all the results, and then I was like, oh my goodness, this was amazing. And I wish at the time I had really absorbed what was going on. And I think in athlete's life, we're just so focused on getting better, doing the next thing, but we're not necessarily in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think you've had similar experience, right?
Absolutely. Like it's always, for me, it's, for instance, comparable for me, it's going abroad to do my master's, which is sort of, my career is more in academics than in sports. And like, when I think back on it now, I'm like, did I really enjoy it as much as I should have? But I also think that it is a really good point about that, is that sometimes mistakes are not things that you tried to do and you failed, or you tried to do and you did wrong. Sometimes a mistake is just something that you ended up not doing, and in hindsight, you're like, I should have done that.
Yeah.
Right? So like, it's not always, when I talk about mistakes, I don't always mean like somebody that just tries to do something and just completely falls flat on their face kind of thing, right? Sometimes it's just, like you said, looking back and being like, I think I did okay, but I could have done a little bit better.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a very important thing for people to realize, is sometimes you have to sit back, and this podcast made you do that and reflect and say, what is it? Am I getting out of this what I want to get out of this?
Yeah.
I think that's a very good point. So then you graduate from Purdue.
Yeah, so actually that was an interesting story as well, just the graduating. I told you my grades weren't very good in high school.
Yes. Did they get any better in university?
They did, actually.
Okay.
So essentially, once I was in university, I had the mindset that I'm not going to mess this up. I am living the dream. I actually was able to acknowledge that, okay, I made it. I got my dream. I'm not going to screw this up by doing bad in school. So I actually excelled in school because I was paying attention and actually focusing, and I didn't want to lose a scholarship, because if you don't have certain grades, you can lose a scholarship. But anyway, so I injured myself, and this is probably the biggest mistake that I made at Purdue. I was back in Canada for the Christmas break, and on my way back to school, I did a track and field meet in Toronto, and I ended up tearing my meniscus.
Yeah.
So went back to school, and I said, Coach, there's something wrong. I jumped and my knee really hurts, and so we had I basically had a torn meniscus, and so that week, it actually only took a week. I went in on Monday. I said, my knee's hurting. Went to the therapists. By Wednesday, I had an MRI, or I had an X-ray, and Thursday I had an MRI, and Friday I had the surgery.
Wow.
That would never happen in Canada.
In a week?
In a week.
Wow, that's impressive.
It's the NCAA, man. They got so much money. It's crazy. So it had a huge surgery, especially for a jumper. I mean, I'm jumping on one leg, and the power and everything. Was
it that leg?
Oh, yeah.
Your jumping leg?
Yeah, it was my jumping leg.
Okay.
So it was done. And now my biggest mistake was coming back too soon. So I had the surgery, and of course you feel invincible as a young guy. No, I can do it. It feels fine. Don't worry about me. Similar to what you were saying today, right? No, I'm fine. I don't need to worry about that pain. Oh, it's just a little pain. It'll go away.
Yeah.
So I was trying to come back to compete, and we were going to New York City for a track meet. And my coach said, I think you're maybe rushing it. You don't have to compete this season because you'll use your eligibility for that season.
Yeah.
And B, you haven't jumped in, a month and a half, 2 months. And all I was thinking was, I want to go to New York.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you have very different mindsets when you're an athlete, because you're like, no, I could do it. It'll be fine. And also, I want to go to New York, but that definitely was not the best thing. So what ended up happening was I went to New York, I jumped, not very good, ended up bruising because there was no more cartilage in my knee.
Yeah.
The bruise that I got took me out for the entire year. Wow. So me going back too soon ended up destroying the rest of my year. And that includes coming to Canada, everything. The whole year was just shot because I destroyed.
Wow.
I came back way too soon, and it was, again, not listening to the therapists, maybe just trying to be one lane focused. And yeah, that was, I look back and that's by far my biggest regret is, why did I force going to that meet? I could have had another season, but again, I used up my eligibility for that season and destroyed my knee for the rest of the year.
Wow.
Yeah.
And looking back at it, or maybe after that, what are some lessons that you learned from that, or what are some arrangement you made with yourself, kind of thing afterwards? What was the conversation going on in your head?
It's as an athlete, it's very hard to really assess your own body in a proper manner, because your brain is so geared towards push through it. You're tough, and it's almost, that's the culture of being an athlete. And I don't know why, it's really hard. But what I ended up doing is just paying a lot more attention to my body and saying, okay, it was really, I know you wanted to go to New York, Derek, but you ruined And so I've really been able to listen a lot more. I don't know everything about everything. And again, I think it was coming from the hockey and all that other stuff that I felt like, oh, I've got this, I can do this. And I think a lot of athletes have that, though. That's the competitive nature of an athlete, is they push their bodies to such extremes all the time that it's redlining all the time. And they're not necessarily listening to their therapists. They're not necessarily listening to their coach. Or they won't even, some of them don't even say, oh, I hurt myself, because they don't want to have that possibility of not being able to play in the next game, right? So, we do these things, and if that's a lesson to other people, then absolutely, listen to your body and keep open communication and understand that you're not invincible.
It's a shame that it's such a hard lesson. It's a whole season gone and stuff like that. But I'm sure that you would agree. A lot of athletes have gone through a similar story. I've heard this story in different varieties more often, and in the end, it does give you that sense of, I need to take care of myself for the rest of your life. It's a lesson that you'll probably have for the rest of your life, knowing if I'm under the weather, if I'm not feeling up to this, I should maybe listen. Yeah. And take a step back or something like that. And
that's the hardest thing for athletes. And I don't know how you would teach that to somebody, but it's experience. Other people saying the same thing continuously, then maybe, some athletes will say, okay, I've heard this story a million times, just like you said. Yeah. And I think this is happening to me right now.
Well, I think one of the things is just hearing it a bunch of times, hearing from people who say, you might have to just trust me when I say that I know you're in your early 20s and I know you feel invincible, but you're not. Yeah. And you are in the end going to get only better if you listen to yourself. And I guess that's a really hard lesson for people to learn, because if you've never really been injured, why would you fear getting injured? Yeah. Right? Or if it's your first injury, you have no idea how to deal with that. So I think what is hard, was important, but also very difficult for athletes, is the moment you get that injury, you need to listen to people who have been through this, and hopefully listening to things like this will really help athletes deal with that, and learn from these mistakes without costing them more than just that one injury. Yeah. Because, you probably could have come back healthier.
Yeah. The whole year, and that was an Olympic year too, so that was, it seemed to be a trend with me actually. 2004, 2008 and 2012. Every Olympic year, I was out for the season.
Do you think that had a reason? Was there something in your mind that was different in Olympic years, or is that just pure coincidence?
I think 2004 was just naive. Again, that was just a stupid mistake that I didn't realize. 2008 actually is when I came back to Canada, and I was moved to Toronto. So I went to University of Windsor after I graduated from Purdue.
Yeah.
Because they have a really good training program, track and field program. They're the best in Canada for that. And the facilities, everything are top notch there. So that's like the best place in Canada to be, in my opinion, for track and field, especially at the university level. 2007 year, I did really well in coming back to Canada. And a lot of that is attributed to the people around me. So all of a sudden, I went from being a small fish in a big pond to a gigantic fish in a small pond.
Yeah.
And it was a very different life. Nobody was buying me books. Nobody was giving me per diem. Nobody was flying me out anywhere. You had to get on your own way. It was just a whole different, it was like black and white. It's like, welcome back to Canada. We really don't care as much about you jumping over a bar. And so it was a huge transition. But I ended up excelling because the people around me taught me that I'm actually more than just an athlete. And this is when I started doing public speaking to kids. Because I went from such greatness, and then all of a sudden there was a lot of people that were looking at me like, oh my gosh, he just broke this record, he broke this record, he broke this record. Oh, look. And all of a sudden I realized I was a person that was able to influence other people. As opposed to when I was at Purdue, I kind of felt like I was just like one of the group, but I was reaching to try and get to them. Here, everyone was reaching to try and get to me. So it was a huge difference. And I ended up excelling more being able to be on top and help people than being on the bottom and trying to climb up. And so anyways, as I was saying, I moved to Toronto. And leading up to the Olympics, you have so much expectations. You're on Team Canada, so they're doing everything they can to make you the best you can be. There's a lot of training changes and diet changes and all of that other stuff. But during the Olympic year, and I think this is fairly common in athletics across the board, is people push themselves too much. You push your body, so you're already pushing your body to 100.
Yeah.
But during an Olympic year, it's like I have to go harder. I have to go stronger. I have to do better.
And you go over that.
And that was like every 4 years. It was amazing. I would go to everything else, and then as soon as the Olympics, I wouldn't even be able to compete at nationals because I'd be injured. It was just an incredible trend. It just happened every 4 years, 2004, 2008, 2012, and that was it. You only have those times. So pushing yourself too hard during those big years is also another thing I would really look back on and say, you know what, like you got here, you're doing good. You don't have to do that extra rep if your hamstring's tired or you know what I mean, like take care of yourself.
And do you think that is something about like not trusting the process or something? Like if you've done the 100% and it's gotten you to Team Canada and it's gotten you to the heights that you're jumping, like what made you sort of like think, like, is it just the expectation or why do you try and push harder, not just trust like, hey, I'm actually doing the right thing, like I should just keep doing it?
It's just trying to get more out of yourself, and you have been getting 100%, but I think it's the allure of the Olympics that make you try and go 110%. And that's, a lot of people learn their limitations during Olympic years, and it's incredible. You know, you'll be first in the nation or first in the world, and then all of a sudden you won't be able to compete at the Olympics, but then, you know, you'll come back, and that's actually what happened in my case. 2008, I couldn't compete because I ended up hurting myself. Hurting my ankle, and then 2009 ended up being the best season of my life. So
so a little bit, I think that's a really interesting dynamic, right? Like obviously 2008 not going to the Olympics, probably a big disappointment. Right. So after that season, I assume there was a moment, a debrief, season debrief at some point or something like that. And you sat down, and what did you tell yourself? Like, what were the lessons you drew from that season saying, this is what I'm going to do different next year to prevent that from happening again?
A lot of it is actual therapy. So through, even when I was at Purdue, after I got my injury, they had sports counselors that would help you.
Yeah.
If you're not doing well or you're losing confidence and what have you. And that's one of the great things in the States, that they have so much mental health for their athletes, and I'm sure for their regular student body as well. But after that injury, when I came back, I was scared to jump. And so I had to go see a therapist because I was just scared. I couldn't put my foot down. I was like, okay, last time I did this, I destroyed it, and then I tried it again, and it hurts even more. So I can't do this anymore. And so going to a therapist, the sports therapist is incredible. And that we have sports therapy for Team Canada. Yeah. And so we would have to go basically every week. You have to have a session and say, okay, how's your training? How's your body feeling? And all that stuff. And that's actually what really transitioned me from not being able to compete again from 2004 and then not being able to compete in 2008. I maintained the therapy throughout because I saw how important it was. It just, track and field and any athletics is so mentally absorbent that you need to sometimes let your thoughts out and talk to somebody who knows and understands the drive of an athlete. Yeah. And so I basically went through therapy after 2008 again to try and collect my thoughts and say, okay, this was the world to me. This is all that mattered at the time. And now I'm going back to Windsor. What am I actually doing with my life? And they're like, you're alive, you're well, you're a great athlete, you contribute a lot. Look at all the positives, and you don't have something terrible that you can't do this again. Let's just find a way of getting you back out there. Yeah, and I think this is a very important lesson for young athletes, which is being at the best of anything is a mental strain on your brain. Like, it is hard to try and push yourself every single day, every single week, and get the best out of yourself. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes people feel like finding someone to talk to and finding someone that can help you sort of, talk about the mistakes you've made and say, hey, what should I do different? And just be a sounding board that just asks you questions and helps you reflect. That is something for people who are sick or for people where there's something wrong. Yeah. But this is what I do in my daily life, and I just see people that in the end just say, I just need somebody to talk to. I don't even need that much from you. Yeah. I don't need you to contribute that much. I just need somebody to sit down and be able to understand what I'm saying and put it back to me and figure out whether it makes sense what I'm saying and whether I'm doing the right thing. And that's the thing when this show is a lot about like what do you change after you make mistakes, right? And some people are really good at that, at reflecting and figuring out, okay, what am I going to do next? What do I need to change? But it's equally normal to find that's really hard. To really struggle doing that, taking this step back and finding someone to talk to and figuring out, letting that person help you figure these kind of things out is not a weakness. It's not wrong. You're not sick. Yeah. It's just being smart. It's being smart and like you said, after that season, I went on and I talked to the sports counselor, I talked to the mental performance consultant, and then 2009, the season after, was my best season ever. So I think there's a lesson for everyone at home. Like, if you think that it's hard to reflect on your mistakes, to find the perspective, I'm healthy, I'm here. I'm still alive, I'm contributing a lot. Go find somebody to talk to. There's a bunch of mental performance consultants out there that are really good at doing that and helping people figure out these things before their career is over, or before hopefully they make a great mistake and injure themselves really badly or something. So everyone out there, if this is a story that really
resonates with you, please reach out to mental performance consultants. They are, I'm sure, as Derek will agree, they're awesome at what they do.
Absolutely, yeah. To go from not even being able to compete at the national championships to winning the nationals the next year, I attribute to like 100% of counseling, because my physical ability was there, just mentally it was shattered, and then that's just the way it went. And that year was also a huge success in finding out who I was again. Again through counseling and teaching. I think teaching what you've learned. So I'd gone through so much already as an athlete that me talking to kids and high schools and elementary schools and just listening to their stories was really cool as well. So
yeah. That's really cool. So then you have 2009 and you become national champion at high jump. What was the height?
It was 218 was the winner. So
218?
it's like 7'1" and a bit, 7'2".
Okay,
yeah.
So you can jump over a decent sized NBA player.
yeah, not Yao Ming yet, but
that's the next step.
Yeah.
So just for people to give them a reference, just put a Kawhi Leonard or someone like that, and Derek just jumps over them. To give you a good example of what that would look like. So what happens after that?
This is actually also interesting, because it's funny. I look at my career and I know every professional athlete is going through the same. They go through the same ebbs and flows and everything. Right now, I'm talking to Justin Duff, who is a professional volleyball player for Team Canada. He was at the Olympics, and he's going to be on this podcast as well. So
yeah, that would be really exciting, especially because my sport is also volleyball.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I'm sorry if we're going to be nerding out during that episode a little bit.
Yeah, so I saw him. There was a world. I think there was like a world games here in Ottawa, and I saw him in Ottawa, and he lives in Ottawa actually. And he's retiring this year, and he came up to me and he said, "Hey, let's get a drink or something." And I said, "Hey, I know you're retiring. I'd like to talk to you about the next steps, because I know it's going to be very difficult." And me just reaching out to him saying, I was a professional athlete, and I understand that you're about to go through a transition that's going to be very difficult. Yeah. He said, "Oh, that's really nice." And then basically after that competition, and he had officially retired, he reached out to me and said, "I really need to talk." So, me and him, we're not best friends. We are athletes, and we both know each other, and we've talked to each other a few times. But this is what every athlete's going to go through: the transition of being on top to, okay, who am I? What am I without this sport? What do I do now that I can't do this sport? And that is an earth-shattering realization, that everything you've done up to this point, all of a sudden that's all taken away from you, and what do you have on your resume? Go get a job. Yeah. So that's a huge transition, and that's one of the things I really want to talk to a lot of athletes about, professional athletes, not professional. It's your identity, and you have to be more than the sport. Because at the end of the day, when the sport's taken away from you competitively, you can't identify so much with it that you're no longer a person. And that's also what happened to me. I went through, after I retired, I was living in my parents' basement at 30, depressed. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a resume. I didn't have any experience. And that's why a lot of athletes will go into coaching. And I actually did coach for the University of Ottawa, but that was just volunteer. So had to get a job, and luckily I had a passion outside of athletics. And that's what I really want people to know is when you're doing sport and you're so into it, you still need another passion. And my passion was computers. Yeah. And I used to love building computers and doing web design and all this stuff. So actually, when I graduated, I had a couple of degrees, but my experience in computers was what got me to where I am now. So I had a lot of experience with my passion on computers, and it was outside of track. But a lot of these people, I know one of my best friends, Mark Dillon, who is also a really good high jumper. He didn't have a passion outside of high jump, and he's still trying to find his way. Yeah. Because he doesn't know what he loves, or he doesn't know what he is without track and field. And I think it's really important maybe for coaches out there as well to sit down with your athletes and say, what did you do today, or what do you love?
Yeah.
And say, no, not the sport, not about tomorrow's competition. What is it that you're doing today that's going to help you out in 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think it's very important. So again, it's a similar question. So what you move back to your parents and you say, like, I'm just sitting there in the basement. That's obviously, I think looking back at it, you would agree that that's probably not the best plan of action.
Oh my god!
People can't see it, but Derek is shaking his head a lot. He's like, "Oh God, no!"
It was so bad.
It was so bad. So that's obviously not the best way to do it. So what again? Like, what's the moment where you realize this and you decide, I need to change my behavior? And how do you go about that?
It's so hard because your focus is so on these one single tasks that are so short term. You can't look at yourself at 30 years old. You can't look at yourself at 35 years old. I can't even think of that. And like I said, Justin is, I talked to him a little bit, and he's going through the same thing. You know, he's like, I don't know what I want to do. It's like, all I know is I can't play volleyball anymore, and I don't know what I want to do. Now, luckily, I had, and some things just fall into place for some people, and I was able to get a very good job right out of this because my sister knew someone who knew someone who, you know, and I got a really good job at IBM, which I still work at. And that was also because of my passion of computers. So I had some computer background, and I love doing that. Now, the people who don't necessarily have that ability to say what they love, I suggest really you've got to find that, because at the end of the day, sure, you'll have all these cool awards, but that's not necessarily going to put food on the table unless you're a coach. And coaching in Canada is, you don't get a lot of money. So if that's your passion, then follow it, but you have to have a game plan. And that's if there's no game plan while you're in the sport, there's definitely not one at the end of the sport, and you're going to be in your parents' basement at the age of 31. Like
exactly.
Like me. So
and you know, we're sitting here, and luckily for you, it worked out. But like, just as well, like if the person who knew the person who knew the person wouldn't have offered you the job, you might have still been there. Yeah. Right. So, and I think that's an important, you know, again, like if we're talking about the things that it's great to look back and like, hey, that's awesome. I'm a national champion, and that's good. But we need to keep in mind that, like you said, there needs to be a long-term plan, and you take all these lessons you learned in sport into your job, and you need to figure out what you like to do. And if it's sport, there's plenty of jobs and there's plenty of opportunities in sport. It can be coaching, it can be, you know, a bunch of other things. But you need to have the plan for after. Yeah. And I think it's really cool that you're helping other athletes through that process right now, because it's very tricky, because you're starting at ground zero again. Like, there's nothing. You're
not only starting at ground zero, the friends around you. All of my friends had owned houses. They all had wives, and I was just starting my life. They had already had 10 years of a career. They bought cars. They had all these things that normal people do, except I had experience of being able to fly around the world and compete for Canada for 10 years, which is amazing. But I had to ask my parents for money to get a coffee. So that was a thing. Yeah. And I don't regret any of it. And I do think that I could have been better prepared. And I want athletes to realize that athletics is not for life. Unless you can be a professional hockey player or the best golfer. But
even then, like, it's not for life. Just because it makes you a lot of money doesn't mean it's still. I mean, like, yes, obviously it's a bit easier. You won't have to ask your mom for a cup of coffee
for Tim Hortons
if you played in the NHL for 15 years. But still, I think we shouldn't take away from that if you then stop playing hockey, you still have to figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life.
Your identity.
You can't just sit there in your $1 million home and do nothing. Yeah. So, like, obviously, the not having the financial needs, the financial means makes it harder.
You're right. Yeah.
But it's still a transition that you need to figure out.
It's an identity thing, and it's like, who am I outside of this, and how do I identify with myself outside of track or whatever.
And I think it's really cool that, you know, the show is about how do you change your behavior because of your mistakes. And it's really cool to see, like, often the examples, like, we've gone through them, like, oh, looking back at it, or because of that I saw this somebody to help me or whatever. But this time you made the mistake of not preparing yourself properly for your transition, and the behavior you changed because of it is now reaching out to athletes that are about to retire, and reaching out and saying, hey, I'm there, because you knew that you would have liked somebody there. And I think that's a really cool thing, that, like, the behavior change doesn't always have to be like an individual thing, like I am now doing things differently. It can also be, I don't want anyone else to go through that. And I think that's really cool, and it shows again, like, the successes you have in any career are great, but in the end it is the things that, the mistakes, the things that didn't go the way you want, that are really stuck in your mind, and really push that behavior change for somebody like you to now actively reach out to people and say, like, hey, I know you're going to retire soon, like, I'm there for you if you need to talk. And helping people like that. So that shows again what the power of mistakes is, if you can call it that way.
Yeah, that's, again, a lot of these things I'm not even realizing until, again, you're talking to me about them, and I'm like, oh, I guess that did happen. Oh yeah, that did happen.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit. So Derek sent me a spreadsheet of his results throughout this year, so I could see a little bit the progression and stuff like that. And then there was I don't know, it was probably 20 or 30 lines of awards that were all.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, like, which one are you the most proud of, and why?
It goes back to, like, you don't realize at the time what's happening. So I think the biggest award that I won was actually it was like a the Windsor City Male Athlete of the Year. It was a Westby. I forget what it was, but I'd moved to Toronto at the time because I was training for the Olympics, and my coach called me up and he said, "Congratulations, you won this award." And I said, "I don't even know what you're talking about. What is that?" And he's like, "You know, you won the best athlete of the Windsor, like the city of Windsor for the year." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was actually a pretty big thing. And I didn't acknowledge it because I was, again, so, okay, that's real cool, I gotta go jump. You know?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, oh, that's
so
so cool.
focused on the process.
Yeah, the athletes, and maybe this is, like, I'm harping on it a little much, but, like, be aware that other people are acknowledging you in a way that you're doing good. You've done really good things, and take a second to appreciate that. I mean, I've won a lot of awards, but I've never really appreciated it until you've asked me to go until you've asked me to go looking back on these things. And it's just being in the moment, and those awards are meant to say, enjoy this. Enjoy what you've done to get to this point, and everybody's acknowledging it, and really enjoy it. I think that one was a big award, but me graduating from university is the biggest award I've ever had, because my grades were so bad in high school, and athletics was able to really drive me in a way for academics, for life, for everything. So I think me graduating from Purdue University it's not necessarily an award, but it's an award to me, because that's like my parents didn't even think I was going to finish high school. So so me graduating from a big school like that is like, wow, okay, athletics gave me the venue, and I really took it, and I was able to finish it and get a degree, and now it's up on my wall of awards. So
wall of awards, yeah. So in the hallway here, there's like 5 like display cabinets with Team Canada outfits and pictures, and that's really cool. I'll take a few pictures and put them on my Instagram. So I think, again, you know, that's really cool about that is the fact that it's graduating is meaningful to you because people thought that you weren't going to even graduate high school.
Yeah.
So the athletics gave you the chance to change that, to right that mistake that maybe like you didn't try as hard in high school as you should have or could have or whatever. And again, I think it's really powerful to see that what you're most proud of is your ability to sort of come back from that mistake and say, yes, that wasn't great, but look what I've done with it. I got the chance and I took it.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. So we've been talking about your career for a bit, and I think there's some really cool things. And again, it's really cool to hear sort of like what went wrong.
Yeah.
And how you feel about that and like how you changed it. So now you said, and you're still doing, you're coaching a bit, you're giving advice to young athletes, and you're giving seminars and stuff. Like, what's the biggest thing that you tell these kids?
The biggest thing is to enjoy what you're doing and the people around you. I mean, I've met so many people in this athletics. I mean, you go to World Championships and there's 3,000 athletes there, and you're in amongst all of them, and you're doing all these great things. Even if you don't go to World Championships, you're going to the local meet. Enjoy the moment, and don't ever think that you're bigger than the sport or you're owed something, or just look around you and say, this is really cool. I'm having fun. And I've met all my friends through athletics. Even you, I've met through athletics. Yeah. I picked up volleyball because it seemed like the next transition to play after high jump. I mean, I can jump high. So
it is a useful thing in volleyball.
Yeah, so I was like, well, I've got one of the parts down, so why don't I try this? And that's what I've been doing since I came back is playing a sport I never played before, but enjoying it on a competitive level, but not nearly as competitive, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I've realized that now I can enjoy the people around me, enjoy what I'm doing, and really having fun with it. And so sports is going to be very different for every person. Some people are going to be amazing at it. Some people are going to be terrible, but they're going to love it. And it's whatever you take out of it, but just make sure that you have a plan outside of the sport. That's the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. And you can't really hear it at the time. I remember my coach asked me one time, he said, so what's your plan after this? And I said, I'm trying to make the Pan Am Games. What are you talking about? And he says, okay, after Pan Ams.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I don't know. That's too far away. I can't think of that. And he's like, you need to start thinking of, because it's coming to the end of my career. He's like, so what if you make Pan Ams? What does that mean? And I was like, well, that's really cool, isn't it? And he's like, but I mean, for you and moving on, you're not going to make a career on that. What is it that you love? So, I mean, I did have one coach that gave me that at the end of my career, which, I mean, again, I was resistant to look at it because you can't see, but just make sure that you have a plan and enjoy what you're doing and be in the present, because once it's gone, it's fun to look back at it, but if you didn't really enjoy it at the time, then you kind of missed out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a great message, I think, taking away from something from your career is like, be in the moment, enjoy it while you can, and have fun, and make the best of it. So one last question before we're going to wrap it up. So there's been a sort of line throughout this story, which is, I click with some people and I don't click with other people. Mm-hmm. Right? You talked about coaches and stuff like that. Do you feel like those experiences working with those different coaches have made you better to, sometimes you have to work with people that you don't click with? Like, what are some lessons that you've learned from the mistakes you made with those coaches that you're using, for instance, in your job or in volleyball or something like that?
It's that's actually a really cool, relatable story. So all of those experiences that I had with multiple coaches, and you click with some and you don't click with others, when you get into a career and a workforce, you're going to have bosses that you don't click with. You're going to have coworkers that you don't click with. You're going to have, you know what I mean? Like it's going to be like that for the rest of your life. And early on in my career, I kind of put up a wall, and I didn't acknowledge that, okay, well, I'm going to have to work with you. I worked against them. And I was young, but you have to understand that as you go forward in life, there's not always going to be people that you click with. And again, I have, bosses and managers, and some of them I don't work well with, but you have to make it work, and you have to learn that there's different types of people and different types of, ways of going about things. So I think learning that you don't always have to be best friends with everybody, but also understanding that everyone else has to work with each other, not against each other. As soon as you start working against somebody, or you just block them off, you're no longer progressing as a person. And so you basically have to learn how this guy might not, maybe he doesn't speak to me on this level, but he definitely has experience and he definitely understands things. And so especially moving into the workforce, there's going to be tons of people that maybe you don't work well with.
Yeah.
And I think athletics has taught me that even if I'm not working well with you, I have to learn how to work with you versus against you. So that's a huge thing.
I think that's a very good point. That is a great lesson that you learn throughout your career. You need to work with people that you don't like.
Yeah.
Once in a while, and you need to make it work. Derek, thank you very much for this conversation. We had a blast. And I think what is a good takeaway for people listening at home is, mistakes are not always fun, but make sure that you are able to reflect on it and learn from them. And you don't always have to learn from your own mistakes, right? If you're listening to this and you recognize some parts of what Derek is saying in yourself, I'm sure that, Derek agrees, like, really try and take it to heart as much as you can. Try and avoid a few of these things that Derek went through. Like, listen to your body, be in the moment, have fun, enjoy it, and have a plan for after. Have a secondary plan, have a plan B whenever you're doing anything with your full effort. Will make sure that you don't get into the situations that really end up really feeling terrible.
Yeah.
And it's always, and we see that now, like, it's easy to look back on the living in the basement and now think it's funny. But at the time, it was probably very, very hard. And right now he's in a place where, he likes what he does and he's very happy with where he is in life right now. But going through those hard moments is really difficult. So please, if you're listening and you recognize parts of you in the story Derek just told, listen to him. If you want to ask any questions, if you are interested, if you want to get into contact with either me or with Derek, you can send me a message on Instagram or on Facebook. You can find me as JWK Mental Performance Training. I'll make sure that if you have a question for Derek and you send it to me, that I'll pass it on along, and I'm sure that he will be more than happy to help people out with their situations.
Absolutely, yeah.
Derek,
this has been excellent.
Any last things you want to share?
No, I'm really happy that you actually asked me to do this. So thank you so much. I'm really excited to listen to it, and I really hope that this does help some athletes out there. And again, like I said, Justin's going to be coming on this podcast, and hopefully maybe he'll had talked to me already, and maybe he'll even learn a little bit about me and this podcast and everything that moves forward. So if I can just help one person, then that's more than anything. So thank you so much for hosting this. This was excellent, and good luck on everything else.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to the Imperfect Athlete Podcast, and I hope to see everyone again in the next episode.